You will spend 26 years of your life unconscious, not resting, not thinking slowly, unconscious, unresponsive, vulnerable. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Science does not have a complete explanation for why. We know that if you don't sleep, you die, faster than you die from starvation. We know every animal with neurons sleeps. We know it's non-negotiable. But a single, unified, first principles answer to why your brain forces you into unconsciousness for 8 hours every night? That remains one of the most honestly open questions in all of neuroscience. I'm Paul Dirac, and I want to think through this carefully with you, because the partial answers we do have are stranger and more beautiful than most people realize. And the parts we don't have answers to yet point towards something deep about what consciousness actually is. Let's start by destroying the most comfortable assumption. Sleep is not your brain powering down. That image of a computer going into standby, fans slowing, processes halting, is wrong in a way that matters. During REM sleep, your brain is more electrically active than when you're sitting quietly awake. Neurons fire in dense, coordinated bursts. Blood flow to the brain increases. The visual cortex generates complex activity without receiving a single photon of real light, which is why you see things while you dream. The motor cortex activates, and the only reason you don't act out your dreams is an active inhibitory system that paralyzes your voluntary muscles during REM. Your sleeping brain is not idle. It is working, expending real metabolic energy, doing something that evolution has decided is worth the staggering cost of lying still and helpless in the dark. The question is what? In 2013, a discovery came out of the University of Rochester that genuinely changed how neuroscientists think about sleep. It had been known for some time that the brain has a waste removal system, but the details were poorly understood. What the researchers found was this. The brain is surrounded by a network of channels wrapped around blood vessels through which cerebrospinal fluid can flow. This system, the glymphatic system, is always present. But during sleep, something remarkable happens. The cells of the brain physically shrink by as much as 60%. The channels widen, and cerebrospinal fluid is actively pumped through brain tissue at a dramatically increased rate, flushing out the metabolic byproducts that accumulated during the day. The most important of these byproducts, amyloid beta and tau proteins. You may recognize those names. They are the proteins that accumulate in Alzheimer's disease, the plaques and tangles that, over years and decades, disrupt neural function and destroy memory. The brain produces these proteins as part of normal metabolic activity. Every day of waking thought, your neurons are generating waste that is subtly toxic if it accumulates. And sleep is when the drain opens. The brain washes itself every night. And the efficiency of that washing depends directly on sleep quality and duration. You are not sleeping because you feel tired. You are sleeping because your brain is running a biochemical sanitation cycle without which it would poison itself. The sleepiness you feel is a maintenance reminder. But cleaning isn't all that's happening, not close. While the glymphatic system runs its cycles in the background, the hippocampus, the brain's short-term memory hub, is replaying the day, not randomly, selectively. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus reactivates patterns from waking experience and transfers them to the cortex for long-term storage. This is memory consolidation, and it's extraordinarily active during sleep. Studies have shown that people who sleep after learning perform dramatically better on recall tests than those who stay awake, not because sleep prevents forgetting, but because sleep actively completes the encoding process that wakefulness began. And during REM sleep, something more selective happens. The brain appears to prune synapses, the connections between neurons, reducing the strength of less important connections formed during the day, while preserving and strengthening the significant ones. The technical name for this hypothesis is synaptic homeostasis. The idea is that waking life generally adds synaptic connections. Every new experience, every association, every learned fact tends to strengthen or form new neural links. If this continued indefinitely without correction, the brain would become saturated. Signal to noise would collapse. Learning would slow. Sleep resets the scale. It selectively weakens the noise and preserves the signal. What this means is genuinely strange. You don't just store memories during sleep, you curate them. The brain edits your past. What you remember of today, what survives into tomorrow, is not a faithful record of everything that happened. It's the output of a nightly selection process, running without your awareness or consent, deciding what matters and what gets discarded. Your memories are not a recording, they're a nightly editorial decision. Now, why do you feel the urge to sleep at all? What is the actual signal? There are two interacting systems. One is the circadian clock, a roughly 24-hour biological rhythm driven by light and darkness, coordinated by a small region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It tells your body when to sleep, aligning your sleep-wake cycle with the environment. But the circadian clock doesn't create the pressure to sleep. That comes from somewhere else. Every waking hour, metabolically active neurons produce a molecule called adenosine as a byproduct of their activity. Adenosine accumulates in the brain over the course of the day, binding to receptors in the arousal centers and progressively suppressing wakefulness. The longer you stay awake, the more adenosine builds, the heavier the pressure to sleep. When you finally do sleep, adenosine is cleared, and you wake feeling refreshed, not because energy was added, but because the inhibitory signal was removed. This is also the precise mechanism by which caffeine works. Caffeine is an adenosine receptor antagonist. It binds to the same receptors adenosine would bind to, blocks them, and prevents the drowsiness signal from getting through. Caffeine doesn't give you energy. It doesn't restore anything the sleep deprivation removed. It mutes the alarm. The adenosine keeps accumulating behind the blockade, which is why when caffeine wears off, the tiredness comes back harder than before. You borrowed wakefulness from tomorrow and paid it back with interest. You weren't more awake, you just temporarily couldn't hear that you weren't. Now let's talk about what happens when you don't sleep, because this is where the stakes become impossible to ignore. After 24 hours without sleep, cognitive performance, reaction time, decision-making, attention, drops to the equivalent of a blood alcohol level of 0.10%, above the legal limit for driving in most countries. After 72 hours, hallucinations begin. The boundary between waking perception and dreaming starts to dissolve. But the most insidious effects are not the dramatic ones. Chronic mild sleep deprivation, 6 hours a night for 2 weeks, produces cognitive deficits equivalent to complete sleep deprivation, while the person subjectively reports feeling only slightly tired. You adapt to feeling impaired. The brain recalibrates its sense of normal downward. People driving on 6 hours of sleep feel fine and are functioning as if they haven't slept in days. The tragedy of sleep deprivation is not just the impairment, it's that the impairment erodes your ability to recognize the impairment. And then there's fatal familial insomnia, a prion disease, misfolded proteins that corrupt the thalamus, the brain's relay station, that progressively and completely destroys the ability to sleep. The progression is invariable: insomnia, hallucinations, dementia, death, within months, without exception. In every documented case, the inability to sleep is lethal, not eventually, rapidly. You cannot compensate for sleep with anything else, not rest, not stillness, not meditation. The specific process sleep performs cannot be replicated in wakefulness. It is categorically irreplaceable. Sleep isn't a dial you can turn down, it's load-bearing. Here's what makes all of this even stranger. Sleep isn't a human invention or a mammalian luxury. It is universal. Fish sleep, insect sleep. The nematode worm C. elegans, with exactly 302 neurons, shows sleep-like states. Jellyfish, which have no brain at all, just a diffuse nerve net, exhibit rest states with the behavioral signatures of sleep: reduced movement, reduced responsiveness, increased rest after deprivation. Whatever sleep is doing, it goes right to the root of what neurons are. It predates brains. It predates complex nervous systems. It may be as old as the neuron itself. Evolution eliminates what isn't necessary. The fact that sleep has survived, unchanged in its fundamental structure, across billions of years of evolution, across every lineage that ever developed nervous tissue, while animals were developing every conceivable adaptation to survive and reproduce. This universality is a very loud signal. Sleep is not optional at the evolutionary level. Nothing has ever found a way around it. That should tell you something profound about how deeply it's woven into the logic of neural computation. Now, I want to be honest about what we don't know, because I think intellectual honesty here is more interesting than false confidence. We have compelling accounts of what sleep does: glymphatic cleaning, memory consolidation, synaptic pruning, metabolic restoration, hormonal regulation. Growth hormone is predominantly secreted during deep sleep. Immune function. Sleep deprivation sharply reduces immune response. These are real, well-supported, important functions. What we don't have is a unified explanation for why all of these require unconsciousness. Why does the brain need to go offline to clean itself? Why can't memory consolidation run in the background while you're awake? Why is the sleeping state, with its specific EEG signatures, its cycles, its architecture, uniquely capable of performing these functions in a way wakefulness is not. The leading hypothesis is that wakefulness and neural maintenance are computationally incompatible, that you cannot process incoming sensory information, run behavior, maintain attention, and simultaneously perform deep repair and consolidation on the same neural hardware. The analogy would be trying to reorganize a library while customers are actively using it. But this is still a hypothesis. The deep answer, why consciousness and maintenance are mutually exclusive, touches directly on things we don't yet understand about consciousness itself. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know why it turns off during sleep, and we don't know why turning it off is the only way to do what sleep does. Those three unknowns are connected, and they might be the same unknown. Here's where I want to leave you, and I think this earns its place because we've actually built towards it. You think of yourself as a continuous person, a single self moving through time, accumulating experience. But consider what actually happens every night. Your synaptic weights are rebalanced. Toxic proteins are flushed from your neural tissue. Memories are consolidated, edited, some deleted entirely. The neural configuration that wakes up tomorrow morning is measurably, structurally different from the one that fell asleep tonight. Not by much, but not by nothing. Sleep is not the pause between your days. It is the process by which today's version of you is converted into tomorrow's. The maintenance cycle, the nightly rebuild. You are not continuous across sleep. You are reconstructed across it. The self that wakes is assembled from the self that slept, altered by a process you neither directed nor observed. And here's what I find most strange of all. You were present for all of it. Something was happening in your brain for 8 hours, active, metabolically expensive, functionally critical, and you have no memory of it. The lights were on in a certain sense, and yet there was nobody watching, or if there was, they didn't leave a record. That gap between neural activity and conscious experience, between being and knowing, is one of the deepest things about being a conscious creature. Sleep doesn't just reveal that we need maintenance. It reveals that we are not simply identical to our waking selves. We are also, and perhaps primarily, whatever it is that runs in the dark. I find that worth staying awake for, at least for a little while longer.